The desert night was cold, and the wind carried the smell of dust and old stone. Among the jagged rocks, a small fire burned weakly, its flames pushing back the heavy shadows. A human man sat by the fire, his face rough and his clothes worn. Yet his hands were steady as he stirred a pot of food over the flames. He had been traveling alone for many days, moving from one ruined valley to another, searching for nothing in particular, only trying to survive. From the corner of his eye, he felt the presence before he saw it. Two figures stood at the edge of the firelight, silent and still, like shadows waiting to be noticed. When he turned his head, the sight froze his breath. They were not human. The taller one was slender, with blue-gray skin that shimmered in the firelight, her long hair falling in silvery waves down her back. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with anger, but with the sharp look of someone always on guard. Beside her stood a small child, the same blue skin, the same glowing eyes, but softer, curious, and filled with silent fear. Both looked thin, hungry, and fragile, as though the world had already taken too much from them. The man did not speak. At first, he only looked at them, then down at his pot of food. Slowly, without a word, he took a wooden bowl and filled it with a portion. He placed it on the ground, pushing it gently toward the fire's edge. The flames made the food smell stronger, and he could see the child's eyes widen. But the mother placed her hand on the child's shoulder, holding them back. "You can eat," the man said, his voice low and steady. "I mean no harm." For a long moment, they did not move. The fire cracked, sparks rising to the sky. The man went back to his pot, pretending not to watch them, though he kept his ears sharp. Finally, the mother stepped forward, her movements graceful, yet cautious, like someone ready to flee at any second. She picked up the bowl, her long fingers curling around it. Her eyes met his, bright, cold, and unreadable. The child followed, standing close to her side, holding onto her cloak. They sat down across the fire from him, still silent. The man could see the way the child tried not to eat too fast, taking small bites, but unable to hide the hunger. The mother ate slowly, her eyes never leaving him. He felt the weight of her stare, sharp as a blade, but he did not flinch. "My name is Eric," the man finally said, breaking the quiet. He did not expect them to answer, and indeed, they gave no reply. The child only blinked, wide-eyed, while the mother kept her silence. It did not matter. He had been alone for too long. Even their silence felt like company. The night grew darker, the fire burning lower. Eric placed another piece of wood on it, the flames rising once more. The warmth pushed back the cold air, and the alien child leaned closer to the fire. Their hood slipping back just enough to show more of their small face. In that moment, Eric noticed the markings, faint silver lines along the child's forehead and cheeks, glowing softly in the dark. He had never seen anything like it. They looked less like scars and more like symbols, written into the skin itself. The mother had them too, though fainter, hidden under the shadows of her hair. Eric wanted to ask questions. Who were they? Where had they come from? Why were they alone in such a dangerous land? But he kept his mouth shut. He knew that questions could drive strangers away faster than knives. Instead, he said, "There's more food if you need." The child's head lifted, but the mother's hand pressed gently against them, keeping them still. Her voice finally came, soft but firm. "We will not stay long." It was the first time she spoke, and her words carried an accent he had never heard before. Her tone was clear. They did not want to belong. They did not want to trust. Arik only nodded, not pushing further. Above them, the stars stretched wide, endless. The wind blew stronger, and the fire snapped, sending sparks into the night. For a while, the three of them sat there in silence. A human, an alien mother, and a child, bound together only by the warmth of a small fire and a shared need to survive. But deep in his chest, Eric felt something stir. He had given food to many strangers before, but this was different. There was something about their silence, their eyes, their hidden fear, that reached into him. He knew this was not the end. This was only the beginning, and so, as the flames burned low and the cold night pressed, Arik made a quiet promise to himself. He would see them again. He did not yet know how or why, but he could feel it in the stillness of the night. Their story had just begun. The next day, Arik returned to the same place with a pack slung over his shoulder. The desert sun was sharp, and the air was dry, but he carried food and water as if it was the most natural thing in the world. He did not know if the alien mother and child would be there again, yet something inside him told him they would. Sure enough, when the sun began to dip, he found them not far from the fire pit where he had cooked the night before. The mother stood with the same guarded look, her eyes sharp and watchful, while the child clung to her side, half hidden behind her cloak. They had not run, and that meant something. It meant trust, or at least a small piece of it. Arik placed his bag down and pulled out some bread, dried meat, and a skin of water. He set them near the fire pit, not too close, not too far. The child's eyes brightened at once, but again the mother held them back. Her silence was stronger than chains. Arik sat on a rock, making a show of eating first, tearing the bread with his hands and chewing slowly. After a while, the mother allowed the child to step forward. The small alien moved carefully, every motion cautious, but the hunger in their glowing eyes was clear. They picked up the bread and tasted it, their small hands trembling as they held it tight. Arik felt something soften inside him as he watched. For 3 days this pattern continued. Arik brought food, he lit the fire, and he shared his space. The mother rarely spoke, answering only with a nod or a short word. The child remained quiet too, though sometimes their eyes betrayed curiosity, watching Arik as he cooked, as he sharpened his knife, as he sat staring into the flames at night. On the 4th day, something changed. The child wandered closer to him as the mother rested near the fire. Their steps were light, almost like a whisper against the sand. They reached out and touched one of his tools, a small carving knife. Arik looked at them and smiled gently. "You want to see?" he asked, holding the knife carefully in his palm. The child tilted their head, eyes wide, then nodded once. He showed them how the blade worked against a piece of wood, shaving it slowly into shape. The child's mouth opened slightly in wonder, and for the first time, Arik heard a sound from them, a soft laugh, light as air. The mother's head turned sharply, her eyes narrowing. She called the child back with a single word, and the child obeyed, retreating to her side. But Arik had already seen it. A spark of trust had begun. It was fragile, like a flame that could be snuffed out with one wrong breath. But it was there, that night, as the stars stretched endlessly above them. The three sat around the fire again. Arik placed more food by the flames, then leaned back against the rocks. He thought about leaving, thought about letting them go their way, but each time he looked at the child's glowing eyes, he knew he could not. Something about them reminded him of innocence, of family he had lost long ago. The mother finally spoke again, her voice quiet, almost reluctant. "Why do you keep coming back?" she asked. Arik looked at her through the firelight. "Because you need it," he said simply. Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for deception, but she found none. Still, she said nothing more. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of strangers, learning to share a space, of hearts slowly lowering their guard. The child curled up beside the mother and drifted to sleep, their small chest rising and falling gently. The fire crackled, throwing shadows across the rocks. As the night grew colder, Arik noticed the mother shiver, though she tried to hide it. He pulled off his cloak and placed it closer to the fire. She looked at him with suspicion, but after a pause, she took it, wrapping it around herself and the child. Her glowing eyes softened for the briefest moment, a look that lasted only seconds before her mask of caution returned. Arik did not press her. He knew some bonds were not made with words. They were made in silence, in small acts, in the quiet moments when survival meant more than pride. The next morning, as the sun rose over the cliffs, Arik prepared to leave again. He slung his pack over his shoulder, but before he turned to go, he noticed something on the rock where he had slept. It was a small stone, carved with faint lines, rough and unskilled, but clearly shaped by a child's hand. The child peeked from behind their mother. Watching him closely, Arik picked up the stone, turning it in his hand, and gave the smallest nod. The child smiled shyly before hiding once more. That day, as Arik walked across the sand, the stone heavy in his pocket, he realized something important. This was no longer just about feeding strangers. A bond was forming, quiet but strong, and with each passing day, the bond would either save them or destroy them. The days turned into a quiet rhythm. Every evening, Arik returned to the hidden valley, carrying food, firewood, and sometimes even water. The alien mother and child were always there, waiting in silence, though they never admitted it. The child began to trust him more, sitting closer to the fire, watching him carve wood or sharpen his knife. The mother, however, remained cautious, her eyes always scanning the cliffs, her posture tense, as if danger followed her everywhere. Arik often wondered what they were running from. He had learned long ago that everyone in the wastelands carried scars, but these two carried more than scars. They carried fear, and one night, he finally discovered why. The fire was burning low, the stars shining coldly above. Arik was half asleep when he heard the sound, faint, distant, but sharp enough to wake his instincts. Boots crunching on sand, voices carried by the wind. He rose quickly, hand on his knife, his eyes narrowing. The mother was already awake, her body tense, pulling the child close against her. Her glowing eyes flashed with alarm, and for the first time, Arik saw true fear in them. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. Arik crouched beside her, keeping his voice low. "Who?" The mother's gaze darted toward the cliffs. "Hunters," she said, the word sharp, bitter, and filled with old pain. "They want us back." The child whimpered softly, pressing their face into her cloak. Arik felt a chill run down his spine. So, that was it. They were fugitives, hiding from someone who refused to let them go. "How many?" he asked. "Enough," she replied, her voice shaking slightly, though her grip on the child was firm. "If they find us, we will be taken, and you will die with us." Arik looked at her, at the way she held the child like a shield and a treasure all at once. He could have walked away right then. He could have chosen safety, but something deep inside him refused. "I'm not leaving," he said simply. Her eyes widened, shocked by his words, but she said nothing. The voices grew louder in the distance, and the flicker of torchlight appeared far across the valley. The hunters were searching, their shadows moving along the rocks like predators. Arik quickly doused the fire, pressing sand over the flames until only smoke rose. Darkness swallowed them, the stars the only light above. They huddled against the rocks, the mother clutching the child, Arik crouching near them, his hand tight on his knife. The hunters' voices echoed, strange and harsh, speaking in a language he did not understand. But their tone was clear. They were searching, calling, hunting. The child trembled, their small glowing eyes wide with terror. Arik leaned closer and whispered, "Stay quiet, little one. They won't find us." The child looked at him, as if trying to believe his words, then buried their face against the mother again. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of footsteps scraping over a rock, the glow of torches sweeping across the valley floor. At one point, a hunter passed so close that Arik could hear his heavy breathing, could see the steel weapon in his hand glint under the starlight. The mother's hand tightened on the child, but neither of them made a sound. Arik held his breath, his heart pounding so hard he feared it would give them away. Finally, the hunters moved past, their voices fading slowly into the distance. The valley grew silent again, broken only by the whisper of wind through the rocks. Arik exhaled, the tension leaving him in one long breath. The mother's shoulders sagged, though she kept holding the child tight. They will return, she said softly, her voice filled with exhaustion. They never stop. Eric looked at her, the moonlight catching the silver markings on her skin. He thought of all the nights he had spent alone, surviving only for himself, and he realized something had changed. He wasn't just feeding strangers anymore. He was protecting them, whether he had chosen it or not. Then we'll be ready, he said firmly. Her eyes searched his, as if trying to see whether his words were real or just foolish bravery. After a long silence, she finally nodded once. It was the smallest sign, but it meant more than anything she had given him before. That night, none of them slept. The child eventually drifted into a restless slumber, but Eric and the mother stayed awake, listening to the distant echoes of hunters. The fire was gone, the warmth replaced by cold air, but in that darkness, a strange bond began to grow. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was trust, built in whispers of fear and the silence of survival. By dawn, when the first light touched the valley, Eric stood and looked over the horizon. The hunters would return, he had no doubt. But he also knew something else. He was no longer just a pet. He was part of their story now, and he would not let them face it alone. The morning sun rose slowly over the jagged cliffs, painting the desert in gold and red. Eric stood at the mouth of the valley, scanning the horizon, his knife strapped to his belt, his pack ready. Behind him, the mother and child stayed in the shadows of the rocks, their glowing eyes watching him. He had not spoken much since the hunters passed in the night, but he knew one thing clearly: they could not stay in the open anymore. Eric turned to them, his face serious. "You can't remain here," he said. "They'll come back. And when they do, they'll burn this place down." The mother's expression was unreadable, though her hand tightened on the child's shoulder. "We have nowhere else," she said softly, her voice calm but heavy. Her words carried both truth and despair. Eric hesitated, then looked toward the northern cliffs, where he knew of a hidden cave system deep within the rocks. He had used it once before to escape raiders, and it had saved his life. But taking them there would not just be guiding strangers, it would be binding his fate to theirs. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the desert wind. Then the child took a step forward, holding out the small carved stone they had given Eric days ago. Their tiny hand trembled, but their eyes were filled with trust. Eric looked at the stone, then at the child, and felt something shift inside him. He could walk away, he could let them face their fate, but the choice had already been made in his heart. "Come with me," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll take you somewhere safer." The mother's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "Why?" she asked. "You risk your life for us, yet you don't even know our names." Eric met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you deserve more than running and hiding," he said. "Because that child deserves a chance to grow, not to live in fear, for the first time." Her hard expression softened, just a fraction. She looked down at the child, who clung to her hand, then back at Eric. At last, she gave a single nod. They moved quickly, leaving the valley behind. The path was rough, filled with loose stones and narrow ledges, but Eric guided them carefully, always keeping the cliffs between them and the open sands. The child grew tired, stumbling now and then, but Eric carried them when needed, their small body light in his arms. Though the mother watched every move he made, she did not stop him. By midday, they reached the cave's dark, twisting tunnels hidden in the side of a cliff. Eric led them inside, lighting a small torch, the warm glow revealing walls covered in strange mineral veins that shimmered faintly. The air was cool, the space wide enough for shelter, but deep enough to hide. "This will keep us safe for now," Eric said, placing his pack down. The mother looked around, her glowing eyes studying the walls, then gave a slow nod. The child wandered near the torch, their small fingers tracing the glowing minerals and wonder. A smile lit their face, the first pure smile Eric had seen since meeting them. He felt his chest tighten at the sight. a fragile joy in the middle of danger. That night, they sat again by a small fire deep inside the cave. The child leaned against Eric's side, half asleep, while the mother watched from across the flames. Her voice finally broke the silence. "You should leave," she said, her tone low but steady. "They are hunting us, and now they will hunt you, too." Arik looked down at the child resting against him, then back at her. "I already chose," he said. "You warned me. But I stayed, and I'll keep staying." Her eyes searched him, filled with conflict. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They will kill you, and they will take us, no matter what you do." Eric leaned forward, his face lit by the fire's glow. "Then they'll have to go through me first." The fire cracked, the sound sharp in the silence. The mother looked at him for a long time, her expression torn between anger and something softer. Finally, she said no more. But Eric could see it, a flicker of trust, fragile but real, hiding in her guarded eyes. The child stirred, waking briefly, and reached into their small cloak, pulling out another carved stone. This one shaped into a rough figure that looked almost like Eric. They placed it in his hand before drifting back to sleep. Eric closed his fingers around it, the rough edges. Digging into his palm, he understood what it meant, even if the mother had not spoken the words. He was no longer just a stranger who brought food, he was becoming something more, that night. As the wind howled outside the cave and shadows stretched across the walls, Arik lay awake. The hunters would return, and when they did, he knew the choice he had made would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. But looking at the sleeping child and the mother watching silently over them, he knew one truth clearly: he would not turn back. The cave gave them shelter, but it could not keep the hunters away forever. For 3 nights, Arik, the mother, and the child stayed hidden inside the winding stone passages. They lived quietly, cooking small meals over a careful fire, speaking little, and always listening to the sounds outside. The mother never let her guard down, and Arik felt the tension in the air grow heavier with each passing day. It was on the 4th morning that the silence broke. Arik had gone to the cave entrance to scan the valley, his knife at his belt, his eyes sharp. The sand below stirred with movement, and far in the distance, he saw them, dark figures walking in formation, carrying torches and weapons that glinted under the rising sun. The hunters had returned, and this time they came prepared. Arik returned quickly, his face grim. "They're here," he said. The mother's eyes hardened, though she said nothing, pulling the child close. The little one looked up at Arik, their glowing eyes wide with fear. "What will we do?" the child whispered softly, their voice trembling. Arik crouched down, his hand resting gently on the child's shoulder. "We hide, and we fight if we must," he said firmly. His voice carried no fear, only resolve. The hunters spread across the valley, their torches throwing long shadows across the rocks. Arik could hear their shouts echoing off the cliffs, sharp commands in a language he still did not understand. They searched every crevice, every stone, leaving nothing untouched. The cave was deep, but not invisible, and Arik knew it was only a matter of time before they came too close. That night, the hunters lit fires around the valley floor, their orange glow filling the darkness. The air carried the smell of smoke and burning wood, heavy and choking. From the cave entrance, Arik watched as one of the hunters set a snare trap. Another dragged brushwood closer. "They want to smoke us out," Arik muttered under his breath. The mother joined him, her glowing eyes cold and sharp in the flicker of firelight. "They will not stop," she said quietly. "They never stop." Arik looked at her, then at the child who was curled against the wall deeper in the cave, clutching the carved stone he had given Arik earlier. He felt the weight of the choice pressing on him again. He could still leave, vanish into the night, but every part of him knew he would not. When the first torch was thrown toward the rocks, Arik acted. He grabbed the torch before it could catch, tossing it aside into the sand, then quickly covered the entrance with heavy stones. Leaving only a small gap for air, smoke began to curl upward, thin at first, but slowly growing thicker. The child coughed softly, and the mother pulled them close, her face tightening with fear. Eric pressed his hand against the wall, his mind racing. He could not let them be trapped. Not here, not like this. "We can't stay in the dark forever," Eric said, his voice steady though his chest was tight. "If they want to smoke us out, we'll give them something else instead." That night, while the hunters circled the valley, Arik moved like a shadow through the cave, gathering what little they had. He broke pieces of wood and cloth, soaking them with oil from his pack. By dawn, he had built a small line of makeshift fire traps inside the cave's twisting paths. If the hunters forced their way in, they would be met with flame and smoke of their own. The mother watched him carefully, her voice low but questioning. "Why risk so much?" she asked. Eric paused, looking at her. "Because I've already chosen to stand with you," he said. Her eyes softened for a moment, though she quickly turned away. When the sun rose, the hunters advanced. Their voices echoed through the valley. Sharp and relentless, Eric crouched by the fire traps, knife in hand, his heart steady. The mother stood behind him, holding the child close, her own eyes glowing brighter in the dim light of the cave. For the first time, she did not look ready to run. She looked ready to fight. The hunters reached the cave mouth, their torches blazing, their weapons drawn. One of them shouted, his voice filled with triumph. Eric struck his flint, the sparks, catching the soaked cloth. Flames burst to life, rushing through the narrow tunnel, filling it with heat and light. The hunters reeled back, their shouts turning into cries of surprise. Smoke billowed out, thick and choking. Arik turned quickly, pulling the mother and child deeper into the cave. "This won't stop them for long," he said. "They'll come back angrier." The child clung tighter to him, their small voice trembling. "Will we be safe?" Eric met their glowing eyes, his grip firm on his knife. "As long as I stand, yes," he answered. That morning, as the flames died and the hunters regrouped outside, Eric knew one thing for certain. The fight had begun. The hunt was no longer a distant threat. It was here, pressing against their walls, breathing down their necks. And whether by choice or by fate, he was now their shield. The cave had kept them safe for a time, but Arik knew it would not hold forever. The hunters were not fools. They had seen the smoke, they had felt the flames, and they would return with greater force. The silence that followed their retreat was heavy, too heavy, like the pause before a storm. Eric stood at the cave entrance, his knife at his belt, his cloak wrapped tightly around him. The mother and child sat behind him, the child asleep against her shoulder, their breathing soft, their small hand gripping the carved stone, tightly even in dreams. The mother's eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, stayed fixed on Eric. "You cannot hold them off forever," she said quietly. Her voice carried neither anger nor scorn, only truth. Arik did not turn. "I don't need forever," he replied, his tone steady. "I just need long enough." The mother tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Long enough for what? Arik finally looked at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Long enough to make them believe this fight is not worth it," he said. Her gaze lingered on him, a flicker of something softer passing over her guarded face, but she said no more. The next day passed slowly, every hour heavy with waiting. The hunters did not attack, but Eric saw them moving across the valley, setting their camp, preparing. At night, the flames of their fires dotted the desert floor like a chain of eyes staring upward. Eric sharpened his blade and gathered stones for defense, his mind running through plans. He had fought for his life before, but never like this, never with others depending on him. The child stayed close to him, their glowing eyes, watching every move he made. At one point, they picked up a small stick and mimicked him, pretending to carve it with invisible strokes. Eric chuckled softly, handing them his dull spare knife. The child's eyes lit with excitement as they copied his motions. For a moment, the cave was filled not with fear, but with quiet laughter. The mother watched, her expression tight, as if she wanted to stop it, but she did not. When dawn came again, the hunters moved. Eric saw them gathering, their weapons ready, their torches burning bright even in the pale light. This was no search party now. It was an attack. Eric's chest tightened, but his hands did not shake. He turned to the mother, his voice low but firm. "When they come, you stay behind me." Her eyes narrowed, a spark of fire flashing in them. "I am not helpless," she said sharply. Eric met her gaze, his own steady. "I know, but that child needs you standing." The word struck something deep in her, and though she did not reply, her eyes softened. She reached down, pulling the child closer, whispering something in her own language, words that sounded like a promise. The hunters' voices grew louder, echoing through the rocks. Arik lit a torch at the cave mouth, the flames bright against the morning sky. He did not retreat into the dark this time. He stepped out, into the open, into the valley where the firelight could be seen. The hunters stopped at the sight, surprised, to see a single man standing before them, his torch raised high. "This is your last chance," Eric shouted, his voice carrying across the stone. "Leave now, and you walk away breathing." The hunters laughed, their harsh voices ringing out. They advanced, their leader stepping forward, a tall figure with a weapon that gleamed like steel under the sun. Eric's grip tightened on his knife, the torch blazing in his other hand. The first hunter lunged, and the fight began. Eric moved fast, striking with the knife, his torch sweeping wide. The flames caught one of the hunter's cloaks, sending him reeling back in panic. Another came forward, but Eric's blade flashed, cutting through the air, forcing them back. Behind him, the mother rose, her eyes glowing brighter than ever before. She raised her hands, and for the first time, Eric saw the power she had hidden. Light shimmered along the silver markings on her skin, pulsing like living fire. The hunters faltered at the sight, fear flickering in their eyes. Together, they fought, Eric with steel and fire, the mother with light that seemed to cut through the very air. The child crouched behind the rocks, clutching both carved stones in their hands, whispering words of courage as if trying to give strength to both of them. The valley echoed with the clash, with shouts and sparks, and the roar of fire. One by one, the hunters fell back, driven by the unexpected fury of a human and the strange power of the alien mother. By the time the flames burned low, the ground was littered with broken weapons and scorched sand. The hunters, defeated and wounded, dragged themselves away, their leaders shouting retreat into the desert wind. Arik stood, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face, his knife still in his hand. The mother stood beside him, her markings fading back to faint silver, her body trembling with exhaustion. They looked at each other in the glow of the dying fire, no word spoken, but the bond between them stronger than ever. Behind them, the child ran forward, throwing their arms around both of them, their small voice breaking into tears of relief. Arik dropped his knife, kneeling to pull the child close, his chest heavy with the weight of the moment. The fire crackled low, casting long shadows over them. For the first time since meeting them, Arik felt something more than duty, more than survival. He felt like he belonged. The valley was silent. Again, the smoke of battle drifting slowly into the cold air. The hunters were gone, their torches left burning weakly in the sand as they fled into the desert. Arik stood still for a long moment, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths, his knife loose in his hand. The firelight flickered over his face, showing the lines of exhaustion and determination carved deep into him. Behind him, the mother knelt, holding the child close, her glowing eyes dim with weariness but alive with relief. The child sobbed quietly against her, their small hands still clutching the carved stones, as though they were treasures of the world. Arik turned and walked back to them, his steps slow but steady, his knife slipping back into its sheath. He crouched beside them, placing one hand gently on the child's shoulder. "It's over, for now," he said, his voice low. The child lifted their face, their glowing eyes wet with tears, and whispered, "You stayed." Eric nodded, a faint smile touching his tired lips. "I told you I would." The mother raised her gaze to him, her silver markings faint in the dim light. "You should not have," she said softly, her voice trembling between anger and gratitude. "They will return. They always return." Eric met her eyes, steady and firm. "Then I'll stand again," he said simply. The weight of his words hung in the cave like an oath, stronger than steel. That night, they did not sleep. The fire burned low, its glow pushing back the darkness. The child drifted into uneasy dreams. But Arik and the mother sat awake, facing the flames. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence filled only with the crackle of wood and the soft breaths of the child. Finally, the mother broke the quiet, her voice soft, almost broken. "You don't know who we are, what we carry, or why they hunt us," she said. "If you stay with us, you will never be free again." Arik looked into the fire, the light reflecting in his eyes. "Freedom means nothing if it's only for me," he replied. "What matters is that no one should have to run forever." The mother's gaze lingered on him, her guarded mask cracking just enough to show the pain beneath. She looked down at the child curled in her arms, then back at Arik. "You speak like you know loss," she whispered. Arik nodded, his jaw tightening. "I lost everything once," he said, "but tonight, fighting for you and that child, I felt something I haven't felt in years." The fire crackled, the shadows shifting across their faces. "I felt like I had a reason again." The mother's eyes softened, and for the first time since they met, she did not look at him as a stranger. She looked at him as something else, not yet family, but no longer apart. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon, filling the sky with pale light. The child stirred awake, their small hand reaching for Eric's arm, as though they feared he would vanish in the morning. Eric smiled faintly, brushing their hair back gently. "You're safe," he said. The words were simple, but the child clung to them like a promise. As the sun rose higher, Eric stood, looking out across the desert. The valley stretched wide and endless, a place of danger and loneliness. He thought of his life before, of the empty days spent wandering alone, surviving only for himself. And then he looked back at the mother and child, fragile, tired, yet still standing, and something inside him made the choice for him. He walked back to them, his voice steady. "You don't have to keep running," he said. The mother looked up at him, confusion flickering in her glowing eyes. "What do you mean?" Arik crouched down, so he was level with them, his gaze firm. "Stay," he said. "Stay with me. Not for a night, not for a week. Stay forever." The child's eyes widened, hope shining in them brighter than the firelight. The mother froze, her lips parting, as though she wanted to argue, but no words came. She stared at him, searching his face for lies, for weakness, but she found none. All she found was truth. Tears welled in her glowing eyes, sliding down her blue skin like drops of silver. For so long she had carried only fear, only loss, only the endless weight of running. But here, before her, stood a man who had no reason to fight for them, yet did. A man who asked nothing in return but their trust. At last, she lowered her head, pressing her forehead gently against the child's, whispering something soft in her language. Then she lifted her gaze back to Arik, and gave the smallest nod. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "We will stay." The child leaped forward, wrapping their arms around Arik, their laughter bright, breaking the silence of the cave. Arik held them close, his chest heavy with emotion, his eyes meeting the mother's across the fire. For the first time in years, he felt whole, outside. The desert stretched wide and endless, but within the cave, something new had begun. Not just survival, not just a fragile bond, but a family, born not of blood, but of choice. And as the fire burned low, and the new day rose, Arik knew one truth. With certainty, he was no longer alone, and neither were they.